There are families the world watches, and then there are families the world whispers about. Names that don't trend on social media. Faces you won't find on magazine covers. Power so deep it doesn't need to announce itself. For over 2 centuries, one name has been spoken in the shadows of financial capitals, royal courts, and global summits. A name that built an empire before empires knew they needed banks. A dynasty that financed wars, toppled governments, and shaped the modern world, often without ever appearing in the headlines. The Rothschild family. Some call them the architects of modern banking. Others whisper they're the silent hand behind thrones, markets, and entire nations. The truth? It's more complex, more fascinating, and far more powerful than either legend allows. This is not a story of conspiracy. This is a story of strategy, of vision, of a family that understood one simple truth before anyone else. Whoever controls the money controls everything. Today, their wealth is estimated in the hundreds of billions. Their influence, immeasurable. Their legacy, still unfolding. Welcome to the hidden empire of the Rothschilds. Frankfurt, Germany, 1744. The world was built on monarchies, empires, and bloodlines. Power passed from father to son, sealed in gold, and guarded by swords. But in a cramped Jewish ghetto, behind walls that locked at night and laws that restricted every breath, a child was born who would change the rules of power forever. His name was Mayer Amschel Rothschild. He wasn't born into privilege. He was born into a cage. The Frankfurt Judengasse, Jews' Alley, was a narrow street where thousands lived in suffocating proximity. Jews couldn't own land outside the ghetto, couldn't hold public office, couldn't walk in public parks, couldn't even marry without permission from Christian authorities. The walls weren't just physical, they were existential. But what they could do was learn the language of money. Mayer's father was a merchant dealing in silk and currency exchange. When he died, young Mayer was sent to Hanover to apprentice in banking. There, in the house of Oppenheimer, one of the era's prominent Jewish banking families, he learned something profound. Money has no borders. It doesn't care about religion or bloodline. It flows to whoever understands it best. He returned to Frankfurt in 1763, not as a banker, but as a coin dealer. Rare coins, antiques, medals from forgotten wars, small trades for wealthy collectors who wanted pieces of history. But Mayer had something most merchants didn't, an instinct, not just for what things were worth, but for who needed them, and more importantly, who would pay. He began cultivating relationships, not with fellow ghetto residents, but with the people who held real power. German nobility, minor princes, anyone with wealth and an appetite for rare collectibles. He sent catalogs, made house calls, offered expertise, and slowly, carefully, he built a reputation. Mayer Rothschild was a man you could trust. His break came through Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, one of the wealthiest royals in Europe. Wilhelm didn't just collect coins, he collected money itself. He rented out Hessian soldiers as mercenaries, profiting massively from conflicts across Europe, including the American Revolution. Wilhelm was drowning in wealth, but he needed someone to manage it. Someone discreet, someone smart. Mayer didn't just sell him coins. He became indispensable, a trusted financial advisor, a shadow partner in royal wealth. And when Wilhelm's fortune grew, so did Mayer's influence. But the relationship was tested when Napoleon Bonaparte's armies swept across Europe. Wilhelm, a target for his British sympathies, fled into exile. He left behind his fortune, millions in currency, bonds, and assets, unprotected, vulnerable, and he trusted one man to hide it, Mayer Amschel Rothschild. But Mayer didn't just hide it, he used it. Quietly, strategically, he lent it out, invested it, multiplied it across borders and conflicts. And when Wilhelm returned years later, his wealth had grown. Mayer had proven something the old world didn't yet understand. Money doesn't belong to those who hoard it. It belongs to those who move it. By the early 1800s, Mayer wasn't just a coin dealer. He was a banker to princes, a financier of armies, a man whose ledger held the futures of nations. But the true genius of Mayer wasn't what he built. It was what he planned. He had 5 sons, and in a world where Jewish families were still confined, still restricted, still second class, Mayer saw an opportunity no one else did. He would send his sons across Europe, not as refugees, not as wanderers, but as generals in a financial army. Amschel would stay in Frankfurt, holding the original base. Salomon would go to Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg Empire. Nathan would conquer London, the world's financial capital. Karl would take Naples, controlling Mediterranean trade. And James would claim Paris, the jewel of continental Europe. 5 brothers, 5 cities, 5 power centers, 1 family, 1 vision, 1 unbreakable network. The Rothschild dynasty wasn't just born, it was designed. Engineered, built on a simple but revolutionary idea. A family that communicates, coordinates, and controls capital across borders is more powerful than any single nation. Mayer Amschel Rothschild died in 1812, just as his vision was taking shape. But his legacy would reshape the world. And it started with 1 man, in 1 city, on 1 legendary day. London, June 18th, 1815. The Duke of Wellington faces Napoleon Bonaparte at Waterloo. The fate of Europe hangs in the balance. Empires wait, markets tremble, fortunes will be made or destroyed, depending on one question: who wins? In London, traders crowd the Royal Exchange, desperate for news. Messengers ride for days. Carrier pigeons are released. Ships wait in harbors. Everyone waits. Every portfolio, every bond, every investment hinges on the outcome of a single battle 200 miles away. Except Nathan Rothschild. He already knows, through a private network of couriers, faster than any government, faster than any military dispatch. Nathan receives word. Napoleon has fallen. Wellington has won. Europe is saved. British bonds will soar. But Nathan doesn't celebrate. He doesn't announce it. He walks onto the trading floor of the London Stock Exchange and starts selling British bonds, heavily, aggressively, with the stone-faced intensity of a man who knows something terrible. The market panics. If Rothschild is selling, Wellington must have lost. Napoleon must have won. Britain is doomed. Traders dump their holdings. Prices collapse. Fortunes evaporate in minutes. Chaos spreads like wildfire. And then, quietly, through agents and intermediaries, Nathan buys everything, every bond, every share, every asset being thrown away in panic. At rock-bottom prices, when the official news arrives hours later, Wellington victorious, Napoleon defeated, the market explodes upward. British bonds skyrocket, and Nathan Rothschild, who bought low and now holds vast quantities, has just multiplied his fortune in a single day. Some estimate he made the equivalent of billions in modern terms. Others say it was even more. Was it insider trading, market manipulation, or just superior information? The world didn't have a term for it yet, but they had a new reality. The Rothschilds didn't just participate in markets, they moved them. This wasn't luck. This was the family's philosophy in action. Information is currency. Speed is power. And trust. Trust is everything. The five brothers had built something unprecedented, a financial network that transcended borders, languages, and loyalties. While kings ruled countries, the Rothschilds ruled capital. They communicated in code, using Hebrew and Yiddish mixed with German to keep their letters secret. They moved money across borders faster than armies could march. They financed governments in private, negotiated loans in backrooms, and turned national debt into personal profit. And they did it with a level of coordination the world had never seen. When Britain needed funds to continue fighting Napoleon, Nathan provided them. When Austria needed to rebuild after the wars, Salomon arranged the loans. When France required capital to stabilize after the monarchy's return, James stepped in. The Rothschilds didn't just lend money. They became the central bank before central banks truly existed. In 1818, they financed a massive loan to Prussia. In 1822, another to Naples. Throughout the 1820s and 30s, they underwrote bonds for governments across Europe, Russia, and even Brazil. They became the go-to financiers for any nation that needed capital quickly and discreetly. But their real innovation wasn't what they funded. It was how. The Rothschilds essentially created the modern bond market. Government debt, securitized, and traded like commodities. Nations borrowing from private bankers to finance wars, infrastructure, expansion. It was a new form of power, one that didn't require armies or thrones or divine right. If you controlled the debt, you controlled the destiny. And the Rothschilds controlled more debt than anyone in history. They funded Britain's purchase of the Suez Canal in 1875, a deal done so quickly that Prime Minister Disraeli bypassed Parliament entirely, borrowed the money from Lionel de Rothschild, and secured the empire's control of the gateway to India overnight. They financed railroads across Europe, transforming transportation and commerce. They bankrolled mining operations in South America and extracting copper and gold that fueled industrial growth. They funded the infrastructure of the modern world. By the mid-1800s, they were the richest family on earth, richer than kings, more connected than diplomats, more essential than any government. They were invited to every royal court, every summit, every backroom negotiation that shaped borders and treaties. They built palaces, collected art, Rembrandts, Vermeers, treasures that today fill museums. They purchased vineyards that still produce some of the world's finest wines. They lived like royalty, because in many ways they had surpassed royalty. Monarchs could lose their thrones. The Rothschilds never lost their ledgers, but with that power came something else, something darker, something inevitable. Whispers, questions, fear, because when one family holds that much influence, the people start to wonder, what else do they control? What else do they decide? Whose wars do they fund? Whose governments do they topple? And who, if anyone, can stop them? The myths were beginning, and some of them had teeth. There's a difference between being rich and being powerful. Rich means you buy what you want. Powerful means you decide what others can buy. Rich means comfort. Powerful means control. And the Rothschilds, they were powerful. And power, especially quiet power, makes people uncomfortable. By the late 19th century, conspiracy theories weren't fringe ideas circulating among paranoid outcasts. They were dinner conversation in European salons, debated in newspapers, whispered in legislative chambers. The Rothschilds were everywhere and nowhere, visible in their wealth, invisible in their influence, and that invisibility bred suspicion. Some claimed the Rothschilds controlled the Bank of England, that no monetary policy was set without their approval. Others said they financed both sides of every war, profiting regardless of who won or lost. Whispers suggested they manipulated currencies to crash economies, that they installed prime ministers, that they decided which nations rose and which fell. Were these claims true? Some were exaggerated, some were outright fabrications, rooted in centuries-old anti-Semitic tropes about Jewish control of money. But some were rooted in something real. The family did hold enormous influence. They did have access to kings, queens, prime ministers, and emperors that most people would never meet. They did profit from conflicts they helped finance. War is expensive, and someone has to fund it. And yes, they did operate in secrecy, because in their world, discretion wasn't just smart business, it was survival. But here's the complexity most people miss. The Rothschilds weren't cartoon villains pulling strings from a shadowy lair, laughing maniacally as empires burned. They were pragmatists, businessmen, survivors in a world that had tried, repeatedly, to erase their ancestors. When you're forbidden from owning land, you master money. When you're banned from holding power directly, you become indispensable to those who have it. The Rothschilds didn't conquer the system. They became the system's infrastructure, the pipes through which capital flowed, the foundation on which governments borrowed, the silent partner in every major financial decision of the 19th century. Still, legends grew faster than facts. Some said the family owned every central bank in the world, a myth that persists today, despite being demonstrably false. Others claimed they engineered the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, orchestrating American monetary policy from across the Atlantic. That they controlled gold prices through secret agreements, that they manipulated oil markets before oil was even a global commodity, that entire governments were puppets dancing on Rothschild strings. The truth, as always, was somewhere between myth and reality, somewhere in the gray zone where influence ends and control begins. Did they influence central banks? Absolutely. Their advice shaped financial policy across Europe. Monarchs and ministers consulted them before making major economic decisions. Their opinions on gold reserves, currency stability, and bond markets carried enormous weight. Did they profit from wars? Of course. War requires financing. Armies need to be paid. Weapons need to be bought. And someone has to lend the money. The Rothschilds financed the British Empire's wars, the Austrian Empire's conflicts, the various Italian states' struggles for unification. They didn't start these wars, but they certainly enabled them. Did they have access to corridors of power? Most people will never see. Without question, they dined with emperors, advised presidents, negotiated treaties in private, moved markets with a single transaction, but owning the world, controlling everything, deciding every outcome. That's where legend overtakes fact. That's where justified concern about concentrated wealth becomes unfalsifiable conspiracy. And that's where the Rothschild story becomes less about what they actually did, and more about what people feared they could do. Because by the 20th century, the world was changing in ways even the Rothschilds couldn't control. New wealth was rising. Rockefellers in oil, Carnegies in steel, Morgans in banking, Vanderbilts in railroads, American fortunes that dwarfed even Rothschild holdings in certain sectors. Oil replaced gold as the currency of power. Technology disrupted old industries. And 2 world wars, massive, mechanized, horrifying, destroyed the European aristocracy the Rothschilds had once served. Palaces became museums. Monarchs became figureheads. The old financial order crumbled, and the Rothschilds, they adapted. They always did. They diversified into mining, particularly in Africa and South America. They became major players in wine production, Chateau Lafite Rothschild remains one of the most prestigious vineyards on earth. They moved into real estate, art collection, private equity. They became patrons of culture, science, philanthropy. They funded universities, built museums, supported conservation efforts, unfinanced medical research. They stopped being the loudest name in the room. But that didn't mean they left the room. By the late 20th century, estimating Rothschild wealth became nearly impossible. Unlike modern billionaires, whose fortunes are tracked through stock holdings and public filings, Rothschild wealth was hidden in private trusts, foundations, and holdings across continents. Some estimates put the combined family wealth at $400 billion. Others claim it's far more, perhaps over $1 trillion, when accounting for assets held through intermediaries. But here's what we know for certain. They still operate. They still influence. They still exist in a world most people never see. A world of private banks, invitation-only investment opportunities, and relationships that span generations, and the whispers, they never stopped. If anything, they got louder. Every financial crisis, every market crash, every geopolitical shift, someone, somewhere, asks the question, who benefits? And sometimes, in the shadows of that question, a familiar name appears, not because they caused it, but because they've learned, over 2 centuries, how to survive it, how to profit from chaos, how to turn instability into opportunity. The 2008 financial crisis. Rothschild advisory firms guided mergers and acquisitions during the collapse. Brexit. They advised on both sides. Every major corporate deal in Europe, their fingerprints are often there, subtle but present, not because they're puppet masters, but because they're still very, very good at what they've always done. Moving money, reading power, staying essential. Paris, London, Geneva, New York, Hong Kong, the Rothschild name still opens doors, still commands rooms, still moves markets, but the empire doesn't look like it did in 1815. It can't. The world won't allow it. Today, Rothschild & Company is a publicly traded financial advisory firm. They manage mergers, acquisitions, wealth management, private banking. They advise governments on debt restructuring. They guide corporations through billion-dollar deals. They're one player among many. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan, not the only player, but still elite, still prestigious, still a name that carries weight in rooms where trillion-dollar decisions are made. The family itself has splintered into various branches. The British Rothschilds, the French Rothschilds, the Austrian line, largely ended by the Holocaust, the Swiss branch, operating in privacy. Each branch maintains some level of wealth and influence, though they no longer operate as the unified force Mayer Amschel envisioned. David de Rothschild leads the French branch, overseeing the family's banking operations and environmental initiatives. He's a conservationist, funding efforts to protect oceans and combat climate change, a far cry from financing wars. Nathaniel Rothschild, once a prominent financier, has stepped back from public life after various business controversies. Evelyn de Rothschild, before his death in 2022, was a fixture of British high society, married to Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, an American businesswoman with deep connections to political elites. The family still owns vineyards that produce wines selling for thousands per bottle. They still collect art, some of the finest private collections in history, pieces that museums beg to borrow. They still fund science, conservation, culture, medical research. The Rothschild Foundation supports countless initiatives most people never hear about, but they do it quietly, deliberately, almost invisibly, because they learned something their ancestors never had to worry about. In the age of the internet, Visibility is vulnerability. The conspiracy theories that once circulated in pamphlets and fringe newspapers now spread in seconds. A single Facebook post can reach millions. A YouTube video can convince viewers of elaborate fantasies. Every business deal is scrutinized. Every donation questioned, every family member's move analyzed by strangers who believe they're uncovering world-shaking secrets. Some of it is anti-Semitism, repackaged for the digital age, the same old blood libels and financial conspiracy theories, updated with modern language and shared in forums and comment sections. Some of it is genuine curiosity about concentrated wealth, about inequality, about how power really works in a world where billionaires seem to operate by different rules than everyone else. And some of it is people trying to make sense of a world where power feels invisible, where decisions affecting millions are made behind closed doors, and where the gap between the ultra-wealthy and everyone else grows wider every year. The Rothschilds are a symbol, a stand-in for every uncomfortable question about wealth, influence, and control. A name that represents something people can point to when they feel powerless, when they sense the game is rigged, when they want an explanation for why the world works the way it does. But here's the paradox. They're also just a family that survived ghettos, pogroms, wars, and revolutions. A family that built something extraordinary and held on to it longer than almost any other dynasty in history. A family that made mistakes, faced scandals, lost members to tragedy, addiction, and obscurity, and yet persisted. So what's the truth? What's real in 2 centuries of myth, legend, and speculation? Are the Rothschilds the secret rulers of the world, pulling strings from hidden rooms, deciding the fate of nations over champagne and caviar? No, that's fantasy, comforting in its simplicity, but ultimately false. Do they have influence, access, wealth that most of us can't fathom, connections that open doors instantly? Yes, absolutely, undeniably. Are they part of an elite network of families, financiers, and power brokers who shape global policy, markets, and governments in ways the public rarely sees? Yes, but so are dozens of others. Families you've heard of: Rockefeller, Getty, Murdoch. Families you haven't. Private dynasties managing wealth through foundations and trusts. Billionaires who make headlines and billionaires who pay to stay out of them. The Rothschilds aren't unique because they're all powerful. They're unique because they've lasted 280 years, through revolutions that destroyed monarchies, through wars that killed millions, through depressions that evaporated fortunes overnight, through technological upheavals that made entire industries obsolete. They adapted, they survived, they evolved, and they understood something fundamental about power, something most people never learn. Real power doesn't need to be seen. It doesn't need press releases or social media followings or magazine covers. It just needs to be there when it matters, in the right meeting, with the right information, at the right moment. That's the Rothschild legacy. Not world domination, not puppet mastering governments, but understanding capital better than almost anyone else. Building relationships that last generations, moving quietly while others shout, and surviving when survival seemed impossible. Today, if you walk through the financial districts of London or Paris, you won't see Rothschild banners. You won't hear their names shouted on trading floors. You won't find them on Forbes lists or trending on Twitter, but in private meetings, in advisory boards, in quiet rooms where decisions about billions are made, where mergers are negotiated and governments seek counsel. The name still carries weight, not because of myth, not because of conspiracy, but because of legacy. because of trust built over centuries. Because when you've been doing something for 280 years, you get very, very good at it. And legacy, unlike gold or currencies or empires, doesn't depreciate. It compounds. It grows, it transforms, and it endures. The Rothschild story isn't about whether they control the world. It's about what it means to build something so powerful, so enduring, so carefully constructed that centuries later, people still can't stop wondering, what do they really control? And perhaps that's exactly how they want it. Because the greatest power isn't ruling everything. It's making people believe you might. It's operating in the space between known and unknown, between visible and invisible, between confirmed and suspected. It's being the name people whisper, but can never quite prove. That's not conspiracy. That's mastery. And the Rothschilds mastered it long before the rest of the world even understood the game.